Welcome everyone to the Stateless Atheist. Today, I'm just uploading a debate, more of a conversation, but on the differences between anarchism and minarchism that I did on the Lucid Truth this weekend, and I want it out there both to promote the Lucid Truth, which is a very good show, and also to show more of my views and to educate in the process. Well, let's begin.
Okay, we are live. So this is Anarcho-Debatism 3. I am curious to see how this conversation will go out because we've been planning it for a while. So we have Daniel Blois and Cody Farias. Guys, thanks for joining.
You're welcome.
Inviting us, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to see this go. So, all right, real quick before we get into the topic, let's do some introductions. So Daniel, what got you into this topic? What are your qualifications? Would it be fair to call you a scholar?
My qualifications are long. I have 3 bachelor's degrees in economics, political science, and international business, and I have a master's in international political science with a focus on economic development. I got into this topic mostly because throughout the years, let's say in grad school for the most part, is probably the biggest turning point. I had a professor who introduced me to Hayek. Once I was introduced to Hayek through Econ Talk, I started to listen to other Econ Talk, and it spiraled out, and I started looking up more topics. And over the years, you could see I haven't read every single page in every single book, but like I'll look up a topic in a book, and I'll look up a topic in a book, and things like that. So
Right.
That should be good for now.
Yeah. So you are an anarchist scholar. I think that's fitting. All right, Cody, what are your qualifications? I know you have some history with supply chain management.
Yeah, so my degrees are in operations and supply chain management and economics. I have spent most of my life actually in restaurants, so that doesn't highly qualify me for an anarchist debate. However, I have lived an extremely diverse and adverse life, which gives me some unique perspectives on functionality and dysfunctionality of governments and systems in general. And I am probably far less credentialed than Daniel over there. However, I am infinitely curious, and I spend most of my time thinking and researching. I don't have a bookshelf of books relevant to the topic per se, but I do have a browser history full of deep dives and debates.
Perfect.
And such. So
I just want to say something that's funny. You work with restaurants. Most of my employment experience has been through food distributors.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, definitely.
You guys can bond about that a little later. So
Yeah.
Nice. That's cool. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's get started. I think clearly where we disagree here is probably the monopoly on force itself. You know, people who support the government think there should be a monopoly on force, right? A monopoly on violence, which is actually the definition of government. And Daniel, you wouldn't agree that is the best way to form a social system. So why do you disagree with that? And Cody, why do you think, if you do, that that's a good idea? So let's start with Daniel, then we'll go to Cody. And we'll bounce back.
Well, there's a couple of reasons why I don't think that's a great idea. Like, if you go, Pete Leeson actually has a great book called Anarchy Unbound. And in it, he talks about different societies throughout history that have been able to socialize without a state. Now, when he calls himself an anarchist, he's a little different. He talks about how people that just are all for the state, their general agreement is that the state is always the best solution no matter what. He looks at it this way. He says, well, no, that's not true. There's
there's a best case scenario of a best state, and then there's a worst case scenario of a state. Take a state like Iraq or Iran.
Mhm.
Would those people generally be worse off if they were in a stateless society? He argues no, not necessarily, because their state is so repressive. Talk about Nazi Germany. Would the Jews have been better off if they were in a stateless society? They wouldn't have had the state forcing themselves on themselves. Now, Pete Leeson stops at that point. He doesn't think the United States or other industrialized economies should ever go towards a stateless society because we already have it somewhat good compared to throughout history. I agree with him if we talked about, if you've ever heard the burning question of flip the switch. If you were given, or press the button, they call it sometimes, if someone gave you a button to press today that would end the state, would you do it?
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't do it for one reason. Because there are certain institutions that are necessary for a functioning society. Right now, the states have taken those necessary institutions over from individual society, so that if you press that button, there will be chaos because those institutions are gone. That's why, like I was talking to you, Isaac, before about how bombing the Middle East creates war, creates terrorism, because what we're doing is we're destroying their institutions that, if you look at the past 20, 30 years prior to us bombing so much, they were actually starting to become more peaceful. But then as we bombed more and more, we've gotten rid of those institutions. That's why, like in Portland, what just happened, while violence didn't necessarily increase because Portland itself isn't that very, a CHOP is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Or Chaz, they changed the name once. While violence didn't necessarily increase, it definitely stayed the same. The crime rate there was always somewhat high. But there was no time to build institutions that would reduce violence.
Right. That would replace the government functions that are currently they have a monopoly on. Right. Yes. You need to transition out of it.
You have to transition out of it. You can't. That's why I think we should always do a slow progression of removal of the state. We got to take away certain institutions first, like the mutual aid, allow mutual aid societies to develop again, Second Amendment rights, because if you look back in the 80s, as repressive as the government it has been to like the black community, the Black Panthers used to protect them. And that's where a lot of Second Amendment laws started to fabricate from. The NRA actually supported gun laws because it was taking the guns away from the blacks.
That's not a great policy. So you believe that a monopoly on violence isn't the best answer, but it needs to be gradually reduced. So, yes. Cody, what is your position on this?
I think we lost him again. I see his mouth, but I can't hear him.
Hey, here. We'll just try to get him to come back. Here he comes. Go ahead, Cody. Okay, well, we'll just have him rejoin. In the meantime, Daniel, I have another question for you. So, based on the monopoly on force, right? So, I was listening to the Sam Harris podcast the other day, and he said, monopolizing violence is the best idea humanity has had, right up there with taking our shit out of our food, right? And it just struck me as, wow, that was direct, because you hear monopoly on violence and you think that's bad, right? He just clearly says that's a great thing. So what do you think on that? Where does he get that from?
Well, like it's coming from. I know he's a big fan of Steven Pinker, and I've never heard him specifically say that it came from Steven Pinker, but I know he's a big fan of Steven Pinker, and Steven Pinker talks about that in The Better Angels of Our Nature. His argument is that is one of the major things that has reduced violence over the last 30 years. I don't think that's a good idea because, Cody, are you back?
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yes. So, what's your position on the monopoly on force? We'll touch back on Steven Pinker a little later.
Yeah. That's a good. I heard a little bit of that, so we should go back to that. Monopoly on force. I think it's, for one, important to distinguish that force doesn't necessarily mean violent force. It can mean like subversive forces. It can mean social isolation force. Anything that kind of controls the behavior mechanisms of individuals through top-down structures. That's kind of how I see it. And so I just want to make the distinguishment that it does not necessarily mean like violent force. And also, I don't know that you can have I guess I need a little bit of clarification. By monopoly of force, it seems to me that in most systems, citizens and individuals are allowed a certain degree of freedom to use force against each other, but not necessarily against the government. Is that still a monopoly in that case? If there are more parties involved that can use force, because we can defend ourselves from other individuals, and to some degree, we defend ourselves against the state, but to a lesser degree. So I'm not 100% sure if that still fits under the qualifying definition of monopoly or not. But a monopoly on force, I think, comes from the idea that to be scared or to behave. And I actually don't agree with the construct in general. And I would maybe ponder, maybe something we could discuss is the idea of a non-forceless state. A state system in which there is some highly degreed structural mechanisms involved that encourage collaboration, but maybe not through a force construct. I have this idea that technology is going to close a lot of these barriers, and we're kind of carrying old baggage from old arguments into a new paradigm that maybe doesn't have the same restrictions. So I tend to remain open on what those definitions mean, what the ideas mean. I see I'm looking for a book right there.
Technology and the End of Authority.
Hey. All right, there we go. I like it.
Nice.
But yeah, and so one of my things is that while I think the state may be unnecessary and that authority may be kind of have been a necessary growing pain throughout history, perhaps we've advanced to a structure with which we can redefine that, or what it means, how force is used, how we equalize force, because that's really the big fear, is the inequity of force. You know, if force is equal, you get kind of a mutually assured destruction or aspect to it between state and citizens. So, yeah, I'd be open to discussing what it means. I'm not 100% convinced that force has been monopolized in a lot of countries that we call states, such as the United States. I don't know that it's not that there isn't inequity in it, but I don't know that that means monopolizing. So it's kind of where I'm going from there.
So, Daniel, what do you think about that? What do you think about the government not having a monopoly because other people can use violence?
Well, first I want to correct. Technically, the term monopoly doesn't mean 100% in one bucket. Like, it can mean that. It doesn't necessarily mean that. Like, if you look at the trial against Microsoft in the 1990s, Microsoft didn't have 100% domination of the computer software in the 90s, but they were still attacked by the Securities and Exchange Commission for having 80% or something like that of the market share. So monopoly doesn't mean 100%. It means an overwhelming majority that the rest of the competitors don't have any type of market force. So there's so much violence that's held within the state that the violence of the individuals are negligent, is basically what the monopoly of force means. It doesn't mean that only the state does violence. And it also, you can look at it another way, that the monopolization of who makes the rules of violence. Like anytime that an individual is allowed to use their own violence to defend themselves or anything like that, it's the state deciding whether or not they're allowed to use their violence. It's not any other disparate group separate from the state that gives them that authority. It's the state that gives them the state is the one who's telling them whether their violence was legitimate or not. But how is that right when supposedly the state is supposed to have gotten their power from us in the first place?
So the state is subjugating its monopoly on violence to individuals.
It's basically delegating it, sort of.
Gotcha. And so so Cody, this is a question for you. Even if the government is not promoting something through the use of force directly, isn't there usually a threat of force if you don't comply? I mean, how do you get government to function without that? It's kind of its default mechanism, its base function. Do you have any ideas on how to get around that?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why we delegate force in that way is to remove individuals' responsibility for the force being predicated. We're blaming an arbitrary third party for telling us that this sort of force is okay. So it kind of removes a sense of moral authority from the individual.
Cody, you're very low right now.
Yeah, can you speak up a little bit? Maybe into the mic? There you go.
How much did you hear?
Just start over.
Yeah, I was going to say
Part of the distinction is that I think that we give the state authority to delegate because it's kind of like not taking responsibility with extra steps, because the state delegates our rules and actions that are acceptable. We're not necessarily held personally accountable for actions predicated on behalf of the state, which I think goes into part of the big movement that's going on right now, is that there isn't that sense of accountability. So there can be, so delegating it is actually partly about removing individual accountability for it. Because what is the state? It's an arbitrary thing. It's composed of citizens and individuals. So when we say the state predicated violence, they didn't, or the state used force. An individual used force with the freedom to blame an imaginary third party. So I think that maybe that's one of the dangers of the state. But the idea that the state using authority is necessarily bad, I'm not 100% convinced on that. And also the idea that monopolies in general are bad in an economic sense, I'm also not convinced on that, because monopolies can often, the idea that they will abuse their monopoly privileges is different than whether they do or not. And so the idea that a government can have force, can use force, whether violent or subversive or through social media constructs and stuff, is different than it actually being harmful. So I think we also have to evaluate force on a spectrum of harm and social benefit in some ways. But the problem is it's all going to come down to the subjectivity of what's good and what's right, which is one of my core arguments of the with anarchism constructs in general, because of the subjectivity of morality. And so I think that The monopoly of force is not necessarily intrinsic in people, but it's meant to remove accountability from the individual to do it. So yeah, I don't know. That's not necessarily like a pro-state thing. That's just what I think about the monopoly of force. But I reserve my opinion that that monopolizing force means that it's going to be applied in a bad way. It also gives the state the authority to protect you on their own terms from outside threats as well, without having to delegate the responsibility onto every individual. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword in that sense. So
Daniel?
Well, I just want to quickly read a quick quote by Rothbard, because you were saying how the state is us. It is common to hear sentiments expressed which violate virtually every tenet of reason and common sense, such as "we are the government." The useful collection term "we" has enabled an ideological camouflage to be thrown over the reality of political life. If we are the government, then anything a government does to an individual is not only just and untyrannical, but also voluntary on the part of the individual concerned. If the government has incurred a huge public debt, which must be paid by taxing one group for the benefit of another, this reality of burden is obscured by saying that we owe it to ourselves. The government conscripts a man or throws him into jail for dissident opinion, then he is doing it to himself, and therefore nothing untoward has occurred. Unlike this reasoning, any Jews murdered by the Nazi government were not murdered. Instead, they must have committed suicide.
Interesting.
So,
sounds like the opposite.
But that's the point. The point is we are not the government. The government is and always has been a ruling body of people over everybody else. There has been, like I said, I was speaking to Cody about this a little bit the other day. There's a lot of ideas on how the state came into force. But I don't know of anybody, even people that are pro-state, that argue that the state came into existence because it was necessary. They might argue it's necessary now, but nobody argues that that's the reason why it came to be. That's different. Those are actually two different arguments. It could have been come to be as for evil intent, but now it's a necessary evil. That's possible. I don't agree with that, but that's a possible argument. I actually just got a book today. I haven't read it yet. An Anarchist View of Early State Formation. So I got to look at that, see what his argument is. He's more of a like an ANCOM. So, but I like to read other views. So, okay, so like you have Mankar Olson, who was a political scientist. He argued that while he was, by our terms, he was a statist or a minarchist or whatever you want to say, left-leaning somewhat, but he believed the state was necessary or at least inevitable. Because like I was talking to Cody the other day, there's three different views. There's either the view that the state is not necessary, there's the state is necessary, or you could argue the state might not be necessary, but it's inevitable. It'll always show up no matter what. So Mankar Olson, he argued that the state, this was more of a thought experiment. The reason why he argued that the state came into existence was because think about a band of thieves. They used to go from town to town robbing people. It's very expensive going from town to rob people. So they eventually learn, and then they bunker down almost like they're the mafia. They know that if instead of going from town to town robbing people, they stay in one place and they say, you know what, if you pay us, we'll protect you from all the other thieves. So he called it roving bandits versus stationary bandits. He called the state the stationary bandit. So he argued that the state is thieves that are protecting us from the other thieves. And that's the reason why the state came to be. Because a certain group of thieves learned that the best way for me to make money is to protect my victims from other thieves. Now, and that's very often the argument that's used. Like he was saying, public defense. Very often people argue, well, the state needs to protect us from other states. Right? That's one of the things you were saying about before, Cody, right?
Yeah.
I actually started to write up my last semester in grad school. I actually did a presentation on anarchy in my class. And my professor said the state would just any stateless region would ever get overthrown by other states. He stated that without coming without having any evidence. So what I did was I wrote up an extra paper and I sent it to him. So I did some research on it, and that's not necessarily held up by evidence that the states will necessarily take over a stateless region. And there's a couple of reasons that I'll give quickly that makes us think that that's not necessarily possible. First off, number one is, why are we giving in violence to one? That's like saying maybe a wife saying, oh, she's going to allow her abusive husband to stay around to protect him against from other abusive men. That doesn't necessarily mean the other states won't come in, but points out that it's not necessarily a good argument. Second thing, there are many cases that very powerful states have not been able to take over stateless regions. When the United States invaded Somalia, when the United States has had so much trouble in Iraq, we've had to keep instilling government there to be able to hold order. When there wasn't, we wouldn't be able to hold it for that long. And the reason why that is because there is no central location for a stateless region. Like, to take over the United States, what do you have to do? You have to overthrow D.C. To take over a state, if the whole United States was all a stateless region, where would you take over to take over the United States?
Right, it's decentralized.
Yeah, it's decentralized, so who do you take over? If you take over D.C., New York is still free. And so on and so forth. I think it's Mearsheimer. Is it Mearsheimer? I'm pretty sure it's Mearsheimer. He's a IR theorist who talks about how defensive positions always have the upper hand. That's why D-Day during World War II, there were so many casualties. There wasn't that many Germans on the beach. They were sitting there just hunkering down and shooting everybody that came out. Defensive positions always have the upper hand. And that's why to take over another state, that doesn't mean an offensive position doesn't take over a defensive position. You just have to send in overwhelming force. I think that should be good enough for now.
Yeah, that was good. Okay, Cody, what do you think?
We'll start with the you have to send in overwhelming force. In our current world construct, I don't see a clash between most geographical, like vying for geographical dominance anymore. What I see is ideological wars, and I think that we see the conquest of ideology being a lot more subversive these days than it ever was in the past. You know, religious, even like Marxist ideologies that are being pressed for currently. It's in a very subversive and through social mechanisms rather than through overt force. Even though if you are paying attention, it feels overt. To a lot of it, it's going underhanded and in subtle messaging. And so I don't necessarily think that all wars are ones of blood and violence, although I do think a lot of ideological wars end as such. I'm
listening.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So, I mean, when we talk about taking over, we have to talk about what we're trying to take over. And what I see is ideologies taking over rather than necessarily one person vying for dominance. I mean, even getting to the status of the president isn't like an omnipotent position. I mean, they still have great influence. So there's very few like individual positions that grant you some esteemed authority, unless maybe we move out of the state and into like the corporate world and stuff where you actually may have more actual authority globally. Yeah, you have any questions on that, Isaac? Maybe I don't want to get too off topic.
Yeah, I do have a question based off of this. So, Cody, let's start with you on this one, and then let's go to Daniel. Do you think that the state is legitimate based off of, how it came to be, why it's in power, that kind of thing? Do you think that since it's in power, it's legitimate?
Yeah. I think you'd be following. Sorry.
It's falling out again.
Were you done? Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is it legitimate? Technically, probably not. But I think the only way to delegitimize it is to have that fantastical button where we could undo all of the generational traumas and woes and violences towards each other. Honestly, I feel like it's just a cluster sense throughout history. Anyone could simply say that they have reorganized everything so that it is legitimate, or all debts have been paid to whoever owes whoever and stuff, because that's the process that we would be talking about. What we can do, I think, is acknowledge maybe the states and structures that are more legitimate in the sense that they have worked hard to equalize, power distributions and dynamics and kind of set them as a new norm. And
or all debts.
I don't. When you go on.
Are you done?
I just think we have to be. Yeah, it's fine. You can go.
Oh, I didn't even start yet. One thing I would say is if you want to talk about war of ideologies, what is it? Samuel Huntington has a great book called The Clash of Civilizations, which is basically that. It talks about how the East versus West, and he wrote it in the 1990s, and that's where a lot of U.S. ideology comes from these days. The foreign policy within the United States is very what's called realist foreign policy, and realist foreign policy is basically that the international system is an anarchist system. There is no central body that they could call for police action. They're all individually in anarchy. So that's what IR theory is. That's what realism within IR theory. And he wrote a book, Clash of Civilization, like he was saying, that there's no longer. He argued that there was no more a war of basically capitalism versus socialism. That it was more now a war of the East versus the West ideology, and he talked about like Christians versus Muslims and stuff like that, and that's very much how the United States has been acting for the last 20, 30 years. And I do agree that Cold Wars, kind of like what you were saying, are more important, that they could turn into hot wars. Wars with guns. And the thing is, I don't think the state is the best way, again, to combat that, because see, I'm looking at it this way. Now, very often you hear studies that are done that say liberals very often argue, violent video games, they think, cause kids to be violent. Violent movies cause kids to be violent. Most of the research been done and shown that not to be true. I think for the main reason why is kids know that's fake. If you're watching a movie, you don't think that's real. But I don't think anyone's ever studied this, and I wish they would. And, well, actually, they sort of have. In one area. There's a lot of research that shows spanking children, which is real now, using violence to overcome, to meet your certain needs. Spanking children overwhelmingly creates problems within children towards society. They're not as socially, they're more socially awkward within society. They're either more violent themselves, or they're less able to handle difficult situations or things like that. I think by having the state, which runs everything on this monopoly of violence, that everything it gets is through violence, it teaches people that violence is a legitimate way to get what they need. No one, I don't know anybody who's done research on this particular topic. If it would be a hard research to do, because you'd have to be able to research people in a stateless society versus compared to people within a stateless state society. But I think by people, they turn on the news and they watch the police or the army or someone, whatever, going down and beating people up to get what they want. Or even just they command things, and that command is initiated by violence. Because, like, say, let's go to the masks. The mandate in certain places, masks are mandated. How do they mandate it? They walk around to people who don't have masks, and they cite them. They give them citations. They don't take the citations. What do? They arrest them. So it's always backed up by violence. And people see this on TV and everything like that. And I think they internalize it. And they come to the idea that violence is legitimate.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
They're making people want to do violence because they see, oh, well, it is a legitimate way. Why isn't it legitimate for me?
Right. And the mask mandates are hurting lower income people, right? And
yes. There's if you look up, there's been reports that the mandates have been having people, police, target the Black community even more because of institutionalized racism and everything like that. So I wish I could post links in here, but I can't. And I'm not talking about some conspiracy website like Alex Jones. I could get it from like the New York Times or something like that. So they're valid sources. So
yeah,
we're using. Go.
What do you think about that, Cody? Because if you support government, right, you would think that something like a mask mandate would be one of the best ways to get everyone on the same page, considering everyone is so divided on the issue of masks per se. Oh, just use government force, mandate it. You have the solution. Where do you lean in this area?
For one, you kind of broke up halfway through, so I didn't sure I quite caught that. I'm just telling you, I may try to move and plug in my laptop at some point.
Sure.
And so if I drop off, I apologize. I'll be as quick as possible reconnecting though.
That's fine. What I asked was about mask mandates.
So you saying if shit.
Well, that's not what I was trying to say. But yeah, that's okay. We'll just wait for you to get that figured out. But so Daniel, what do you think about this then? Do you think that, I mean, obviously the mandates don't work perfectly because you have the problems that you already gave, where people are being disproportionately discriminated against. However, what is a better solution to get people on the same page in a free society? You know, what kind of management system do we come up with?
I don't think you need everybody on the same page. Like he was talking about innovation and everything like that. We have to look at society and like, so what are reasons? What is he doing? He's writing notes.
He's jotting some of this good stuff down.
Oh,
let's see. Hey,
I can't even read it.
He's just gonna talk with the notes, like holding them up.
He's like, no.
Yeah, you can just word your arguments. Well, you're not muted right now, Cody. So let's see if here, this might bring him back in. I am curious what you have to say about this, Daniel. Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you were asking about mask mandates?
Yeah. You would think if you support the government and its use of force to solve social problems, at least in certain circumstances, mask mandates would be a great example of that, ignoring the disproportionate discrimination we were talking about earlier. So, where do you lean there?
I'm pro individual choice, and I think that the goal of government is not to minimize all risk or to eliminate any form of naturalistic harm that could befall all. I think that perhaps maybe with medicine we should have proactive messaging, but more reactive, like medical stuff. So maybe focus on diets. I don't think we should enforce masks over through force of the government or even social force, mostly because in order to do that, I think you would have to take an approach such that you evaluate most mechanisms in society to the degree with which you become up with an actual objective measurement of the potential harm in society that it caused, and then you have to apply this sort of mandate across the board for similar harm factors and risk factors. And I don't think we have the resources to do that, and I don't think we should do that, because if we took coronavirus, for instance, as the standard, we would be mandating against many things that are necessary just for cohabitated living, car accidents, alcohol consumption, stuff like that. And so, I mean, there are drugs that I think we can legalize that are maybe more harmful than coronavirus. I'm pro legalization of some of those drugs, over that maybe have more global harm than coronavirus and stuff. So those are kind of the consequences of taking that sort of
Gotcha. So you think that basically it's not an appropriate use of government force to mandate these masks, but in other areas like defense or areas like that, government might be something that can be more reasonable. I think he was shaking his head there, but I think that was a good summary. So if he comes back, we'll ask him this too. But here, I'll just pop him back in. But Daniel, for now, what do you think about how we would actually get people on the same page? Like, what mechanism would we have for information verification?
First off,
that can get us all on some kind of common ground.
First off, I want to start with a lot of people argue, like I've seen a lot of people arguing lately. Oh, this whole you've probably seen the meme. Oh, COVID-19 is showing people not to be able to self-govern themselves.
Just like the shopping cart.
So therefore, liberty is not possible.
Right, just like the shopping cart meme.
Yes. The problem with that argument is it's actually throwing out what the actual argument of liberty is. Number one, the argument is that while the state is in many cases worse. That's number one. If you look at Dr. Becky, he's an economist from Georgia Mason. He's got a paper. I don't remember it off of the top of my head. Again, I wish I could post links. We should find. You should get some type of a live stream that I could post the links. I would have posted like.
I can screen share any content you have.
I gotta find that. But
yeah, we'll do it next time.
So Dr. Becky argues that there's a difference between formal institutions and informal institutions. An informal institution are rules within society that have no formal structure to them. We could use language as an example, or we could even use, actually, a good example would be, who was it? Mike Munger talks about this in his speech, that if tomorrow, if they made murder legal, murder would still be illegal. Everybody would still consider it wrong. They wouldn't consider it right. The vast majority of people consider murder wrong. So an informal institution would exist even if there wasn't a formal institution for murder. The problem comes in when you create a law that is not in line with informal institutions. Prostitution. A lot of people are okay with prostitution. So it causes a lot of black market activity.
Right. Cannabis,
other drugs. If everybody was against drugs, you wouldn't even need the law. Nobody would do them. So the problem comes in when you have a disconnect between informal institutions and formal institutions. The only time these institutions, the formal institutions, could work is when they line up. So, okay, so we're doing the mandates. The second thing, well, right now, the way the United States, it seems that the formal institutions and the informal institutions aren't lined up. A lot of people don't want to wear masks. So what are you doing by forcing it on them? A lot of people still not wearing it, or they're not wearing it correctly. You're not doing anything better. So you're actually making it worse. Because by putting it on their face, they do have to touch their face, which I agree. So I agree if you put the mask on correctly and everything like that, you overcome the, it's a better situation with COVID. But if you're putting it on incorrectly, like you're putting it under your nose,
messing with it all the time,
you're not making things better. You're actually making things worse.
Yeah, I had a theory that people who refuse to wear masks probably are the people who would wear them wrong anyway. Which is, I don't know how much truth there is to that, but it makes sense.
I look at it this way. Go back to what Cody was saying before. You have, as Israel Kirzner talks about it, you have entrepreneurial discovery. We have to understand why people won't wear masks, and we have to come up with solutions to either solve why they won't wear a mask or solve other issues of how COVID can spread. A vaccine, of course, would be one thing. There's an article here. Indoor spread of COVID-19 can be lessened, experts say, through better ventilation and things like that. So there's engineering that could happen within buildings to reduce the spread of COVID. I read an article recently that some doctors, it's not studied yet, but if you think about it, it makes sense that face masks might be better, not face masks, face shields might be better than face masks.
Oh, it does make sense, yeah.
The reason why is also face shields are a two-way protection. As opposed to face mask, you're protecting everybody away from you. You're not protecting yourself. Face shield, someone sneezes, it just hits the shield.
Right. There is the problem with how those look, though. They're not quite fashionable, but that's not our primary concern right now.
Yes, but like masks themselves aren't that fashionable.
I don't know. I have a cool mask, dude.
They're making them more fashionable now, though.
It's cool because you're wearing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
What did he say?
He just won the debate, my friend. Sorry. He said my mask was cool because I was wearing it.
if you actually look, Dr. Steve Horowitz just posted. I think it was Horowitz who posted it. That new fashion lines are coming out with matching masks.
Oh yeah, I've seen some of those before.
Match the clothing.
Yep.
If face shields do prove to be more beneficial, which now it does get rid of one reason why people won't wear face masks. Some people won't wear face masks because it does nothing for me. I'm protecting everybody else. I'm not sick, so why should I even bother to wear it?
Right.
If it's a face shield, now it is protecting you. There might be a reason for you to wear it. You're correct. It's ugly. So why can't we make them better looking?
Matching face shields that go with your outfit.
Something like that. You could make it fashionable, maybe for women. Could make almost like a crown, like make it like Wonder Woman's. What is it? The tiara that she wears. Something like that. So if we could overcome the solutions, we can overcome the problems that people have. Entrepreneurial discovery to me is more powerful than creating a one size fits all solution.
Interesting. Okay. Cody, what do you think about this? Because it seems like some of these mechanisms of social influence outside of government violence, you maybe would endorse as alternatives?
Yeah, so my the only label I really identify as pro-social, so I wrote down in my notes positive reward system. So we have this idea that the only way to get people to behave is through negative reinforcement or overt force. However, if I'm telling you, if I'm saying must mandate at risk of, it's a totally different thing that says if you wear a mask in public, I will pay you $100. You will find that people will behave the way, and they won't view it as so you can incentivize pro-social behavior in such a way that it doesn't feel like you're infringing on your right because you got a particular benefit. So my idea of what a state could be is a pro-social state in the sense that it encourages and designs its structures in such a way that citizens receive a positive benefit for following, not being like positive benefit for doing it as opposed to force. However, and Daniel will point this out, if they don't take the money and they still
I think you went out.
All right, I think I can see where he was going though. If they don't take the money, then it's not going to work.
Take the money and still still not wear it if there's no punishment.
Right. Well, what do you think about his general premise, Daniel, that you can reinforce social behaviors with more positive reinforcements?
Well, first thing I want to say is, in a certain way, he's correct. If you look at the research, you have the difference between negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement changes behavior quicker. Like if you slap a hand, they'll stop doing something much sooner than if you offer them money. But positive reinforcement has shown to have longer term changes.
Compliance.
So like if a employer writes you up for not coming late, that will stop you from coming from late for a couple of weeks. But if the employer instead congratulates you on every single time you come on time, that might encourage you on a longer period of time. So he's correct on that positive reinforcement does help. The only thing is, I don't know if you need a state to do positive reinforcement. Why couldn't a mutual aid society? Why couldn't so for people who don't know what a mutual aid society, it's similar to a charity, but it's a bunch of people who get together and they decide that they want to help each other within it as opposed to help people without it. Charities help people outside the group mostly, and mutual aid societies are everybody that helps each other within the group. back in the 1920s, to give you an example, very good portion of the United States healthcare was actually through mutual aid societies. People used to get there. You probably heard of Knights of Columbus. Have you heard of the Knights of Columbus?
Mm-mm.
You've never heard of the Knights of Columbus?
Nope.
Did you ever watch Raymond? Everybody loves Raymond.
No.
Do you ever hear any show where they go, "I'm going to the lodge"?
Never.
You've never heard of that?
Never.
It's really run out of. Well, the lodge are remnants of what were called mutual aid societies. People paid into the monthly, and they got a lot of benefit out of them, and even more when they needed it. And wow, this is the first comment we've heard all day. I've heard of the Knights of Columbus. That's what mutual aid societies were. You paid into it, and you got benefit back. And they helped you when you were old. They helped you. You got monthly health care, everything like that.
He said like contract networks.
Contract networks.
Is that what you said, Cody?
Like Costco. That's what I was saying.
Oh,
No, I said like Costco.
Yeah.
So it's everybody within the group helps each other. So why couldn't a mutual aid society or even a charity going around and offering people money for the masks? Why do you need the state for that?
What do you think, Cody? Do you think you can have a pro-social reinforcement mechanism without a government? Or are you saying we should redesign government to have that function? Is that really your argument?
I think that it's worth a social experiment and worth seeing if it is possible. I think another thing to understand is that in people in general, when you resort to force, generally it's a reflection of the scarcity mindset that exists within the individual. Like Daniel was saying, it's generally to get short-term, quick responses versus long-term. The ability to speak with kindness as a parent or as a boss or a leader is actually someone who is like more actualized and has the ability to reach for those longer term goals rather than expecting people to comply in the moment. And also, I think a part of being in, promoting those pro-social things is allowing just a little bit of humanity in people. If you see someone going 5 over, it's not necessarily a ticketable offense, especially if you look around and there's no one on the road, or it's like 2 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
And I think that our could make a lot more sense. I think it's hard to argue for the state when most of us live in such a construct that a lot of our rules are totally arbitrary and don't make a lot of sense. I wonder what would happen, or if there would be the same complaints in a state system with which people were rewarded for pro-social behavior to the degree that it would be such a great incentive that there would be no incentive, no financial or economic or individual incentive to behave otherwise. So yeah, it's still force in a way, but I don't think it's a force that anyone would complain about, which I think is the real issue, which kind of like Daniel talking about how the only real argument is when the social institutions don't line up with the formal institutions and stuff. And so the idea would be maybe to negate that completely so that people they get so much reward from the institution that they don't really care that they're being, subversively controlled to behave a certain way.
By the institution. So this is interesting. You're supporting a reformatting of the state to encourage more pro-social behaviors voluntarily through positive conditioning. And Daniel is supporting the idea of eliminating the state, considering it's illegitimate in some of his other arguments, in favor of something like a mutual aid society or a voluntary society or something like that. I think it would be interesting if we tried both of these mechanisms and saw which one worked out the best. Mm-hmm. But maybe that's a little bit idealistic because, testing whole different kinds of economic theories is a little infeasible, at least in already owned territories. It's hard to convince the state to try something new. So I mean, we could have seasteads or startup societies. How do you guys think we could experiment with some of these concepts or really get the ball rolling on some of these ideas?
I think the United States state system, that where the states have a great deal of authority in their governance, is a good place to start. You know, we could find a state or city or county or something and try it out, see what happens, and maybe replicate it if it works. Don't if it doesn't. I mean, that was kind of one of Bernie Sanders' whole platform things. Look at how Vermont, you know, and stuff ran while I was mayor. I mean, he made his socialism based on a small case study with which he had a ton of anecdotal experience. And I think we can do that in the United States. I think the United States might be the only place in the world with which that could be done effectively, because each state is in essence a little social experiment. I want to finish this. I also want to get on to some questions I have for Daniel.
Awesome.
In my research, yeah, there were some gaps in that I just couldn't fill through research in the amount of time I had, and I would like to know some thoughts he has. I'm not totally against it. Yeah, I'm not totally. Are you okay with that, Daniel? Can I throw some things your way?
Sure.
Okay. So for one, I don't think that people have a great deal of diversity in both behavior, expectation, ability to adhere to rules, ability to behave within certain constructs. So I would like to propose an action-oriented social construct with which people could move freely through different government constructs with which they currently identify. So the idea would be, if you know, some people like overt control. I have 3 kids, and one of them likes to refer to authority. The other one likes to subjugate authority, you know. And the idea would be that both of them would probably not succeed under the same construct, and that maybe we should individualize the government to fit who it is. Because like you said, if people are living in a construct with which they feel validated and secure, they're not going to complain, whether it's a state or not. And so if we do like some sort of social, analyze social systems and stuff, I think we would find that certain people are probably more compatible with different social structures, and maybe we should pursue that as an actual larger construct of society with which people I called it platform and social fluidity. The idea that we can engage in a construct of our choice, because the real idea is that the government at some point, or the state, infringes on our freedom of choice, and so the state is almost antithetical to freedom in some way, or the actual grand idea of freedom should be individuals being individuals of their own accord without any influence. But anytime we're collaborating, we're going to find that clash of ideas and ideals, and I think that maybe social fluidity is an idea that could negate the argument altogether. And I guess there are some areas in which I think maybe self-governance without some sort of centralizing agent may limit our ability to progress. I wrote down, I think anarchy tends to converge on tribalism, because it has difficulty taking advantage of economies of scale, ease of information flow that comes with aggregation and centralization, struggle to centralize quality of life among different tribal units due to highly differential living structures between habitated spaces. So if there's no method of aggregating quality of life, I feel like we may actually, while some tribal units may perform better and elevate their standards, I worry about a system with which we decentralize completely from the state and we leave people behind, because they're less capable of collaborating in the same way. You know, we exist. One of the things I like from the modern left movement, that really shaped my worldview was the idea of spectrums, the idea that we could be on a sexuality spectrum, an intelligence spectrum, a physicality spectrum, a spectrum in literally every characteristic. Some people have the rules. I heard this, it was either Sam Harris or Mindscape, Sean Carroll. They had someone on talking about the looseness and tightness of rigid adherence to social norms and stuff. So that's kind of my argument to you, is that we have difficulty, one, that some people, no matter what structure you give them or freedoms you give them, they're going to struggle. So decentralizing, I don't think, will ever benefit those people, because I don't think anyone is going to necessarily willingly include someone in their in-group that they know is going to decrease the efficiency of their survival or progress. So I think that those might be barriers that we're going to run into. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that was very interesting. What do you think about that, Daniel? I've never considered that some people might do better in a stateless society and some people might do better in a government.
One thing we have to look at is, first off, we're looking at many of these arguments are always predicated on society the way it is now. You're looking at society as, like, basically what Cody's saying is the argument how very many libertarians are arguing for open borders, and other people are arguing for, like, the Hobbesian ethno state, almost, where keep everybody out, or what does he call it? It calls it not Hobbes, not Rothbard. What's his name? Hoppe. Hoppe argues for each state is, not state, but each region privately owns their region, and they're able to keep people out, which I agree with that in principle, but there should be, for any anarchist region to be successful, they have to be based on liberal values, which means acceptance of other people. But where right now we're looking at society, like I was saying, the argument is the way it is now. There are people in society now that they're trained. First off, people are trained to be reliant on the state. Then you have other people that don't have training. They don't have skills. They're like, you go into poor neighborhoods, they're not being educated. So those are the people that people want to be keeping out. So the state is actually creating the group of people that you expect for out groups to have. Back in the early 1930s, I think it was. Let me just double check. 1921. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Cody. Black Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard of it?
I have.
That's the situation that I'm talking about. The governments weren't really enforcing rules on the black people, on the black community as much, and they were able to develop and become rich. They did it without the state's help.
Yeah.
And so without a stateless society, I don't know if it's not gonna necessarily be where you're gonna have a certain out group and a certain in group. I think people will flourish more. Right now, you have the state that's actually keeping the black communities poor. They pay very little in their. Is Isaac even here anymore?
We don't need him.
Yeah. Well, Cody said he wanted to talk to you, so I figured I'd let you.
No problem. I was just wondering where you weren't. So that's one thing right there is the state is creating these out groups right now. The people want to keep out. Like there's another book. Where is it? Imagine Communities. Now, Imagine Communities is by an anthropologist named Benedict Anderson, who talks about how nationalism is based upon what he calls imagined communities. Now, what that means is we in the United States believe, I don't so much, but a lot of people in the United States believe that we're all part of one community, but it's not really a community. Community means you know the people. So it's not really a community. It's an imagined community. You imagine it as a community, even though it's not. You're very different. Like, I'm in New Jersey now, but I'm from New York. I'm very different from someone in California. I'm not any more similar to them than I am from someone from Quebec, or very small difference. And we build these idea of these communities together based upon stories. The American Dream, or American exceptionalism, which is technically means something very different than the way the Republican Party means it. It means we're different. It doesn't mean we're better, but they use it that way. And so nationalism, while it's not inherently based upon the state, because you have what's called multi-nation states, you have states that don't have a nation. So nations and states are different, but states prey upon the idea of nationalism. And they use those
forces
they use that idea of nationalism to create the outgroups. Look at Trump saying, "Oh, look at the Mexicans; they're sending all the worst to us. Let's make America great again." He's using nationalism to create the outgroup of the Mexicans. So I don't know if you really have that tribalism as much without the state reinforcing it. Like, even if you look at throughout history, you had very different powers, like the Qing dynasty in China, or even they talked about everybody else outside of them were the outsiders. All different groups, kings and everything like that. They always talked about the outgroup as the outsiders. They're the barbarians, they always called them. And I think the idea of the in-group and the out-group is more caused by a hierarchy than it is by if we had a flat, more of a horizontal structure.
Okay. Do you think that people would naturally so the idea of a community is a set of shared values and behaviors. I don't think you can have a community where people don't share values and behaviors, right?
I agree.
Yeah, and so in that sense, I feel like with or without the state, I do think the state can create in-groups and out-groups intentionally. I think people can do that as well. I do think that we would naturally cohabitate with people with which we are more similar than with which we are not. And so I don't know that we can blame the state for creating in-groups and out-groups, but I can definitely agree that the state has definitely used maybe our natural tendency in malicious ways to create certain contexts. I have a very labelist view on the world. I don't like. I think identity itself creates in-groups and out-groups. The second you identify, you have created an in-group and you have defined the out-group. So identity with me needs to be deconstructed in the United States as less important than what it actually, or global. I just think as a construct, identity is dangerous. Identity in general seems antithesis to freedom because it actually puts us in a box by defining who we are. And the second we give ourselves a label, we also create the
antithesis.
Yeah, and we also create the tendency to not want to be different than the label. We've accepted the label. So I think labels are dangerous. That's why I kind of label myself as like pro-social because it's like the least label I could think of and still carry a significance in the wording of it and stuff. And so I don't think that we would have the state is responsible for in-groups and out-groups. I think we probably do that normally. Is the state responsible for defining them? No, I don't think they should. And I like this idea. What was it you said? Mutual benefit? Is that what it was?
90s? Mutual
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. Maybe you could send me a link on it and stuff. My definition of state operates a little differently than yours in general, so I'm trying to restructure my arguments to fit yours. But yeah, what do you think about our natural tendency, with or without? And also, one of the hard things is there's no one alive that knows what it's like to exist in a stateless system. Very few, very few. Maybe in certain like native population or something, they haven't quite reached that and stuff. But yeah, it's hard to know whether we do that. Also, I think another thing of community is community in general has to be fairly small.
I agree with that.
It can't be. I think large communities are very difficult to maintain because we start to incorporate too much diversity in opinion and behavior. And like I would never ever. There was something you said that kind of made me cringe a little bit. The idea of like forcing out the other. I don't like that. I like the idea of collaboration.
No, I'm not saying
but
that.
I also like the idea.
I'm not saying I would. I'm saying that.
Oh, okay.
That Papa has.
Oh, okay. I think we naturally do that. That we don't need to define it at a state level. So
now. What I was saying was, I wasn't saying that I think I may have misspoke a little bit. I wasn't saying that the state creates the in-groups and the out-groups. I'm saying the state creates the negative view between them. Like you have your friends. Anybody who's not in your friends group is outside your friends group, but that doesn't mean you have a negative view of everybody outside your friends group.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's what I think. I think the state preys on our in-group and our out-groups. It creates that in it. So, where was I going with that? What were we talking about? You were talking about
just like how we naturally segregate ourselves or separate ourselves from the out group. But like you said, that doesn't necessarily mean that you place connotation on the out group. I think that the negative connotation is one created or promoted by the state, the negative connotation to preserve itself. And so the state creates the negative, and then now we have like social media platforms which create, completely enable echo chambers and never thinking outside the box at all. And so now we're in this dangerous thing where in the past, you may be, I don't know, maybe it's same, but different. We're always in an echo chamber, whether we have access to or without, as long as we can control where we get the info from. But what do you think? Sorry, I'm kind of rambling.
I think, first off, like you were saying, I do think communities need to be small. And that's one of the biggest problems with a state. Like you were saying earlier in this whole conversation, that there's different views on morality. And I agree with that. But that's why communities need to be about 100 to 1,000 people at the most. I don't know the exact amount, but this is what I'm guessing would be the correct amount, because it would have to be a very small, direct democracies, because then it's not forced on the people. The two things that are necessary for it not to be forced on people is a direct democracy, and when you have it that small, there's a lot less responsibility. You get rid of what's called rational ignorance. I don't know if you know what that is.
Right.
So you get rid of rational ignorance, and you need.
I think I could derive.
you need a low cost of exit and entry. So if the area starts doing something you don't like, it's very easily to leave, or or at least some way that you could opt out of it. In certain cases, that's why we would also want to remove a lot of things that the state currently does into more of a decentralized system where it's not even just 100 communities. We could have different organizations that are they could either be syndicalists systems where a bunch of run by individuals, or they could even be private systems. I'm not negative on private property. I just think private property as it is currently is forced on people because we're born into it and we're taught that that's the only way, as opposed to I don't think it's either natural, or I don't think communist property is natural either. Did we lose him?
You got him replaced with me.
So,
I hope that's okay with you. Oh no, here he is.
Okay, so
Is that better?
Yeah, there you
I
are.
don't know if that was
back.
Okay, cool.
So
I heard the beginning, but I'm sorry.
Well, what I was saying was that's why we need to take away a lot of, which I think you agree with, away a lot of the ideas from the state. Now, you were talking about how I think something you might want to look up. It's called wow. I'm trying to remember what it was called now. I had it before. Oh wow. I'm losing my mind right now. You know what it is? It's too late for me. I'm old. I'll remember and I'll type it up. Okay, so polycentrism. Cody. Something you were talking about before about how you're talking about your daughters.
Yeah, I'm here.
How they like different structures.
Yeah.
Look up polycentrism. Look up polycentrism.
I'm on it.
That's a polycentric law.
Many different centers of people. Okay, I like it.
Yeah, so that's something you should.
I'll look into it.
That might be now that's what I'm talking about. Like, there's so many things that don't have to be centralized within the community. Even there's certain things that I think will always be centralized within the community. Protection, whatever. But it won't be protection by a state. It will be protection by individuals within the community. Now, I think there's other things that we could delegate out to different organizations, either organizations in a certain group of people or an individual, whatever. Like, you have, I think I talked to you about this. I can't even find it right now. Private governance, right here.
Yeah.
From Ed, he talks about how we could delegate a lot of things to different private institutions. He uses the distinction between a private good, a public good, and a club good. We could get into that if we need to, but we don't have to have everything centralized. And by doing this, or we could even do Eleanor Ostrom was talking about how different communities without the state could create ways to overcome collective action problems. Even that's what Pete Leeson talks about in Anarchy Unbound, how different communities have throughout history. And you even have, you said you like Milton Friedman. I told you to look up David Friedman. He came out with a new book recently called Different Legal Systems Than Our Own. And in it, he talks about different legal systems throughout history. And some of them are anarchic and some of them are not. But he talks about how different legal systems have developed throughout the centuries. And there's anarchic, stateless, I should say, legal systems within there. So societies have existed without a state, and they've been, for their time, relatively less violent. Because people have an incentive to work together. The whole Hobbesian view of the state of nature, the reason why people create a state is because they want to get out of the war of all against all. Yeah, people want to get out of the war of all against all. So why do they have to create a state to do that? They can't create a state because the state they're creating over other people. Why can't their individual community overcome it?
Yeah. My things with the, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you right now.
I have to ask that every time now. Okay. So why so I do like Milton Friedman, I think that government should play a very minimal, or the state should play a very minimal role. You used like the early 60s, 70s, and 80s about how the state went in, and that's when things happened. I mean, that, like, we look at the welfare, we introduced the system, and there's like a direct correlation within like 2 years of almost every single thing in every community that received welfare was just a straight downhill. I mean, there was almost nothing good that has come from it.
I lost you again.
You got me though. Well, what do you think about what he said? And then I have one question to ask both of you, and then I think that probably should wrap up this conversation pretty well.
I didn't get much of what he said to expand upon.
You just this is how it works. You got to reply based off like no information, and that's intellectual honesty.
5 words.
Yeah, that's how we have real, honest discussions, very genuine ones. Here, I'll kick him off real quick, and I'll bring him back on. But I'm glad he's gone. I'm glad I let you guys kind of go off on there. That was interesting, seeing how that worked out. Okay, here he is.
Is it?
I guess it's debatable. No, look, see, there's his.
I see his name.
My kid moved over there, and my connection went out, so I'm pretty sure they're related.
There you go. Yeah.
What were you asking?
Right?
It cut out right. Yeah. You were asking, can you rephrase your question right in the beginning of it?
Well, I asked Daniel to respond to what you said, and then I was going to ask a question, but he didn't get your whole argument. So if you want to reiterate it, he can respond.
Did we lose him again?
No, this is his argument. It's a pretty solid one.
Yeah. All right. How am I coming through? You guys are coming through.
You're good. You're good. So what was your argument just now?
23. Mine?
Yeah.
I was under the impression that Daniel was about to talk and that you were asking him a question, and then I cut out.
We'll just go with that. That's fine. All right, here's the last question. So I have been looking into this book called Inadequate Equilibria, and basically what it's about is that there's this common misconception that there are powerful people running the world, small group of elitists, Rothschilds, all that. And if we just get rid of those people, the world will be fixed. And it simplifies the problem and helps unite people against a common enemy, when in reality, the threat is non-existent and it's illusionary. And so the thing is, there can be good people in these systems trying to do good things, and they can still get out of whack because systems don't operate at the same level that individuals do. But if you can understand the systems, you can affect them and hopefully have some real positive change. You can't really fix the world if you're living in a land of illusion. So what do you guys think about that the idea of power structures and the people within them, and analyzing systems in a way that allows you to effectively change those systems. So let's start with you, Cody, because normally I think we've started with Daniel, and then we'll finish off with him.
Okay. For one, I think anyone who, I think people have a lot of faith in the ability to manage projects on such a large scale. I think anyone who has tried to do any project management realizes that it's actually incredibly difficult to do. So this idea that there's just a few people pulling the strings across the entire world is kind of optimistic. I think there are probably a lot of people trying and very few that are succeeding very well.
Right. I would agree with that too. And so how do you change the system though? By, like, you have to look at it at the level of systems, right? Not the level of individuals operating within the systems.
How would we change it? Like, when you ask that question, I think, how would we move to like the pro-social structure? And I think you have to start very small. I think, for one, people are completely unwilling to change their opinions without overwhelming evidence. And even then, they're,
even then it's still hard.
Have to replicate an alternative structure many, many times. And so it's just people who have the vision being willing to get into leadership positions to do it, which is difficult. And as far as like going stateless, I think Daniel is going to have to take over mayor somewhere and deconstruct the state from within, or at least make it so that it's no longer relevant and stuff. It's just going to have to take people taking control. Maybe that's very state of me, but people with the vision applying it in a small setting, in a community setting, and replicating it to more. Changing things on a large scale is a recipe for disaster. You're gonna, the mechanisms that involved are gonna find, you're gonna find too much clashing between even the people. There's not gonna be there's gonna be agreement. But if I've always had the idea that we should focus on communities rather than the national level. I mean, if your community's good and stuff, and there are systems in place to help other communities, which sounds like I may move more towards what Daniel was talking about and stuff, where we communities and then people that go through and make sure everyone's doing well. But there has to be some agreed upon, and it's going to happen. I don't see any like clever answer that I can give that's not going to start with, you have to start it with a small population that does very well and replicates it. I don't necessarily think this is the way. I think
I agree.
we do have mechanisms in society such as town hall meetings and stuff like, sorry, I have a mosquito flying on my face. Town hall meetings and stuff like that. I think we should start by using the actual systems that we have and see what happens there, rather than ignoring all the systems for change that we have and then complaining. I think we need to take responsibility for our roles within the system and apply them. I think one good thing that I have one more thing to add. One thing that could help Daniel along in his agenda and mindset is kind of that hashtag system. A lot of the government or the state was necessary when communication dispersal and information flow was fragmented and slow, and now it's not. And I think as such, we can actually solicit funds. I think industry and capitalism and business has kind of circumvented the need for state on a lot of things. And we should pursue that. We should look for ways to get rid of government to solicit funds to communities, where a community can go, hey, Walmart, you exist in our city. We need money to build a center. We need money for this and stuff. And that is the role, that would be the role. I call it pro-social capitalism, with which businesses exist for the benefit of society. And as such, they become mechanisms of society because, like I said before, there is no economy with just me. It's an us thing, and therefore it exists for us as a tool. And we can choose to use tools like a hammer to do bad things, or we can build a house with it. And I think that we have the ability to negate the state argument by further developing our economic systems, and an action-oriented economic system could apply socialist ideals in times of prosperity when we have an abundance of stuff, but maybe something more controlled and centralized could be good when resources are scarce and quality of life is low or something like that. You know, I could see that. So I just want to add that. What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, it was interesting.
I agree with a lot of what he said. Like I said, first off, like you're talking about systems thinking. Now, it's not an either individual or a system. It's what's called overdetermination, overdeterministic. That means the system determines the individual and the individual determine the system. So it's not like one causes the other and the other is just the result. It's they cause each other. So within Adam Smith, Adam Ferguson, and a bunch of the other Scottish Enlightenments, Hayek, they talk about how you have what's called spontaneous order. Order comes from the individual pursuit of your own interests, creates the order within society. It's the whole butcher baker quote. The butcher, the baker, and you don't get your dinner. I don't remember the exact quote. Let me see. Butcher, baker, quote. Adam Smith. Let's see if I can find it. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the baker, or the brewer that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never to talk to them about our own necessities, but to their advantages. What it's basically saying is we're meeting our needs by fulfilling the butcher's needs by giving him money, and that by everybody doing this, it creates an order within society. So that creates the system, but then the system helps create the individuals. So it's not an either or thing. They're both relevant. That's why any individual who says, a lot of libertarians say, oh, forget, there's no such thing as society, or there's no such thing as community. That's completely wrong. It's a self-reinforcing structure. Without society, individuals will die. Without individuals, society will die. He's correct. Cody's correct that economy can't exist off of a single person. You have Wittgenstein talks about what do you call? He called it a private language. Language does along the same lines. Language and the economy are both social structures. You can't have a social structure without the social. Like he talked about an individual, if he didn't live in society, a language would mean nothing. There would be no purpose of language because there's nobody to talk to. So the same thing with an economy. Economy makes no sense. Like who are you going to barter with if there's nobody to barter with? So now how do we change this?
Exactly.
Now, like I say often, I think the way to change society, the biggest, is through education. People have to learn. Like, that's why I started my YouTube channel. That's why I do things like this. That's why I read myself all these. I'm looking for the answer to try to tell other people. And
the answer hasn't been thought of yet. That's why you have a million books behind you on it.
I got to put all the books together, and that's the answer.
There you go. Yeah.
Exactly.
And because like I talk about often is all behavior is preceded by thought. All I'm not talking about reflexes, but everything is built upon an idea. When you create a new law, it's built upon an idea. Someone goes murder someone, it's built upon an idea. Ideas are more powerful than violence. Because think about it. I could kill how many people with a gun? 10, 15 people, I'll be killed pretty quickly. How many people did Hitler kill with an idea?
A lot.
So if you change minds, that's much more powerful than a gun because, like, and that's how the state reinforces its power also. We're going back to the whole idea I was talking about how the imagined communities and all. The state knows that it needs to keep its legitimacy in order to stay in power. So they talk often about how they have their legitimacy. That's why they have the national anthem. That's why they have they talk about the mandate. Throughout history, governments have always thought of ways to argue that they had a legitimate power before what we have now, democratic power, democratic legitimacy. You had divine right of kings. In China, they had something very similar. It was called the mandate of heaven. Heaven gave them the power to rule. So, and people believed that. So the state is just built upon an idea. Violence is created by an idea. Everything, the whole world is built on ideas. So that's what it's the most important thing is changing people's perspective. It's more important than changing the rules because the rules won't change without the new idea. So if you really think about it, if the state is built upon ideas, why couldn't you have a society that's not built upon the state, but still built upon ideas?
That makes sense to me. Awesome, guys. Well, I think that was an awesome conversation. Wow, that was pretty intense. I learned a lot. I think that I'm going to have to take both of your positions at the same time. And so I'll advocate for a government that doesn't exist. Does that meet us in the middle?
The government that only exists when we need it to exist, depending on the current social, economic, and environmental factors that we face.
We'll see if we get there later, but yeah, this was good. So how can we find you guys? Daniel, you mentioned your YouTube channel. What's the name?
I have a YouTube channel called Stateless Atheist.
Stateless Atheist.
Right
so
on.
No gods, no masters, right?
Gods, no masters.
Awesome, cool. And how about you, Cody?
You can just find me on Facebook with my name.
Great. Daniel, can we do that for you too? I'm pretty sure your last name's different on Facebook, right?
Well, I have both accounts. This is my real name. On Facebook, the one you're referring to more, Daniel Bastiat, that's my sock account.
Oh, gotcha. Cool. Well, guys, thanks for the discussion. I thought it was super interesting, and I have some stuff to think about. I might be making some post on Facebook that you guys will be like, yeah, that was from that conversation. So we'll see what happens here. So have a good night, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope everybody enjoyed episode 3 of Anarcho-Debatism.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you soon.